In the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, where coalition forces battled an elusive and determined enemy, one special operations unit earned a reputation that set them apart from all others. The Taliban, hardened fighters who had faced American Delta Force, British SAS, and elite units from across NATO, developed a particular wariness when it came to encounters with Norwegian special operators. This wasn't born from propaganda or military posturing. It emerged from hard-won experience on the battlefield, from operations conducted with a precision and patience that became the hallmark of Norway's contribution to the longest war in modern Western history. When the towers fell in New York on September 11, 2001, the world changed forever. Within weeks, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom, targeting the Taliban regime in Afghanistan and the al-Qaeda network it harbored. As coalition forces assembled, Norway committed its elite warriors to the fight. Among the first to arrive were operators from Forsvarets Spesialkommando, known as FSK, Norway's premier Army Special Operations Unit, and Marinjegerkommandoen, or MJK, the Navy's Maritime Special Operations Force. These two units would spend the next 20 years operating in Afghanistan, building a combat record that would earn them respect from allies and adversaries alike. The Norwegian Special Forces who deployed to Afghanistan were products of what many consider one of the most demanding selection and training programs in the world. To understand why the Taliban came to fear these operators, you must first understand what forged them. The selection process for both FSK and MJK is legendary for its brutality. It begins with a 2 to 3 week screening that eliminates the vast majority of candidates. Those who survive face a gauntlet of physical and mental challenges designed not just to test endurance, but to break down individuals and rebuild them as part of something greater. Before we dive deeper into their story, if you're finding this documentary informative and engaging, please take a moment to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more in-depth military history content like this. And don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts or any questions you might have about special operations in Afghanistan. The Hell March, as it's known among MJK candidates, involves grueling treks through Norway's unforgiving wilderness, carrying crushing loads across rugged terrain while navigating and solving tactical problems. Candidates face survival phases in the Arctic cold with minimal food and shelter. The psychological pressure is immense, constant, designed to reveal who possesses the mental fortitude required of special operators. Very few complete the entire process. Those who do enter a training pipeline lasting over a year, learning skills that range from advanced combat shooting and close-quarters battle to high-altitude parachuting, combat diving, mountaineering, and Arctic warfare. This last skill, Arctic warfare, would prove surprisingly relevant thousands of miles away in the mountains of Afghanistan. Norwegian operators train in some of the harshest environments on Earth, the frozen reaches of northern Scandinavia, where temperatures plunge far below zero and darkness dominates for months. This training instills more than cold weather skills. It develops patience, meticulous planning, attention to detail, and the ability to operate in small, self-sufficient teams for extended periods without support. These characteristics would define Norwegian special operations in Afghanistan. In early 2002, FSK operators participated in Operation Anaconda, one of the first major battles of the Afghan War. In the Shah-e-Kot Valley and the surrounding mountains of southeastern Afghanistan, coalition forces engaged concentrated al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters in a conventional battle, unlike most of what would follow. Norwegian operators fought alongside American forces in the high mountains where altitude and terrain created challenges beyond the enemy. The bitter cold at elevation, the thin air, the rugged landscape, all played to Norwegian strengths. Their Arctic training translated directly to mountain warfare. Their ability to move carefully through difficult terrain, to establish observation positions and maintain them for extended periods, to coordinate precision strikes, all proved invaluable. The Norwegian contribution to Operation Anaconda earned recognition from the highest levels. President George W. Bush personally awarded the Norwegian contingent the Presidential Unit Citation, a rare honor for foreign forces. But this was just the beginning. As the war evolved from conventional operations to counterinsurgency and counterterrorism, Norwegian Special Operations Forces adapted, taking on roles that would ultimately define their reputation. By 2007, Norway had shifted its primary special operations focus to Kabul and the surrounding provinces. Rather than conducting unilateral direct action missions, Norwegian operators took on a more subtle but ultimately more impactful role, training and mentoring an elite Afghan police unit designated Crisis Response Unit 222, or CRU 222. This decision to focus on building Afghan capacity rather than simply conducting raids reflected a sophisticated understanding of counterinsurgency warfare. The Taliban couldn't be defeated by foreign troops alone. Victory required creating Afghan forces capable of securing their own country. CRU 222 was envisioned as a highly trained counterterrorism force, Afghan-led but NATO-enabled, capable of responding to complex attacks in Kabul and beyond. Norwegian FSK and MJK operators rotated through Kabul to train, advise, and, when necessary, accompany these Afghan police on operations. The relationship that developed between Norwegian operators and their Afghan counterparts became a model for special operations partnering. The Norwegians brought a particular approach to this mentoring mission. Unlike some coalition forces who maintained distance from their Afghan partners or treated them as auxiliaries, Norwegian operators embedded deeply with CRU 222. They trained alongside them, ate with them, lived in close proximity, and, crucially, trusted them in combat. This wasn't naive trust, but professional respect earned through shared hardship and proven competence. The Norwegian selection of Afghan candidates for CRU 222 was rigorous. Training lasted months with an intensity that caused nearly 1 in 7 to drop out before completion. Those who made it through received instruction in close quarters, battle, precision marksmanship, tactical site exploitation, hostage rescue, and crisis response that rivaled special operations training anywhere. But it wasn't just the technical skills that made this partnership work. It was the Norwegian approach to warfare itself. Norwegian operators are trained in what their own doctrine calls switching on and switching off. In combat or on operations, they are utterly focused, professional, methodical, but they also know how to relax, to conserve mental and emotional energy, to maintain their humanity and humor in the face of constant stress. This ability to modulate intensity, to be both deadly operators and approachable mentors, made them exceptionally effective trainers. The Afghan operators of CRU 222 absorbed not just tactical techniques, but a professional mindset. They learned to plan meticulously, to rehearse operations, to consider contingencies, to prioritize precision over speed when lives hung in the balance. They learned that special operations aren't about individual heroics, but team coordination, and most importantly, they learned that elite status is earned through performance, not granted through title. The results spoke for themselves. According to official reports from the Norwegian government, between 2007 and 2021, Norwegian Special Forces working with CRU 222 prevented 46 complex terrorist attacks in Kabul. 46. Each one of these attacks, had it succeeded, could have killed dozens or hundreds of civilians. This represents thousands of lives saved through a combination of intelligence gathering, precise planning, and flawless execution. Consider what preventing 46 terrorist attacks means operationally. It means developing intelligence networks that can identify threats before they materialize. It means the painstaking work of surveillance, of tracking suspects through a complex urban environment without being detected. It means rapid response when intelligence indicates an imminent attack. And it means the skill to neutralize threats in an urban environment filled with civilians, where a mistake can turn success into tragedy. CRU-222, guided by their Norwegian mentors, became experts in all of these disciplines. They thwarted vehicle-borne explosive attacks, prevented armed assaults on government facilities, stopped complex coordinated attacks designed to inflict mass casualties. They became the Afghan government's premier crisis response force, the unit called upon when situations were most desperate. Several specific incidents illustrate the caliber of both CRU-222 and their Norwegian partners. On May 13, 2015, gunmen launched an attack on the Park Palace Guest House in Kabul, a facility that housed foreign civilians. CRU-222 responded immediately, but the situation was complex, with hostages held by well-armed attackers prepared to fight to the end. An MJK operator named Ken Anderson was embedded with the Afghan unit that day. As the situation unfolded, Anderson didn't hang back in an advisory role. He moved with his Afghan partners into the building, clearing rooms, evacuating civilians, and ultimately helping to neutralize the threat. His actions under fire demonstrated the Norwegian commitment to genuine partnership. Afghan forces weren't being sent into danger alone, while foreign advisors watched from safety. The Norwegians were willing to stand beside them. Months later, in October 2015, attackers targeted the Russian embassy in Kabul. Again, CRU-222 responded, and again, Ken Anderson was in the thick of it, working with his Afghan counterparts to resolve a dangerous hostage situation. For his extraordinary courage in both incidents, Anderson was awarded the Norwegian War Cross, one of his nation's highest honors for valor. But the award was as much a recognition of the partnership model as of individual heroism. Anderson could act effectively because CRU-222 was well-trained and reliable. They could trust each other in the most dangerous circumstances. This wasn't the only recognition Norwegian special operators received for their work in Afghanistan. Lieutenant Commander Trond André Boll was awarded the War Cross with Sword posthumously for his command of Norwegian Special Operations Force Task Group 2 in Helmand Province from October 2005 to February 2006. Helmand in southern Afghanistan was among the most dangerous areas of the country, a Taliban stronghold where British and American forces would fight intense battles for years. Bolla's task group operated in this environment, conducting direct action missions, special reconnaissance, and forward air control, calling in precision strikes on Taliban positions. The work was dangerous and demanding, and Bolla's leadership under fire earned him his nation's highest award for gallantry. Lieutenant Lars Christian Lauritzen and Major Christian Berg Stang also received the War Cross for bravery in combat during ISAF operations in 2007 and 2008, respectively. These awards, spread across years and different operational contexts, speak to sustained Norwegian engagement and repeated acts of courage under fire. But courage alone doesn't explain the Norwegian reputation. Many nations had brave special operators in Afghanistan. What set the Norwegians apart was how they applied that courage, the operational methods that made them particularly effective and, from the Taliban perspective, particularly dangerous. Norwegian operators brought to Afghanistan a tactical patience that contrasted with the more aggressive posture of some coalition forces. This patience wasn't hesitation or timidity. It was the discipline to wait for the right moment, to gather complete intelligence before acting, to plan for contingencies, and to prioritize precision over speed when precision meant the difference between success and civilian casualties. In a counterinsurgency environment where every civilian death could create more insurgents then a successful raid eliminated. This precision was strategic, not just tactical. The Taliban learned to recognize Norwegian operational patterns. There would be no rushed operations, no half-planned raids launched on fragmentary intelligence. When Norwegian-advised Afghan forces came for you, it meant they knew where you were, what you were doing, who was with you, and exactly how to isolate and capture or neutralize you with minimal collateral damage. The professionalism was unnerving to an enemy accustomed to exploiting the mistakes of less disciplined forces. Norwegian operators also benefited from operating as part of a smaller military. The entire Norwegian Armed Forces numbers only about 1/5 the size of U.S. Special Operations Command alone. This forced efficiency and versatility. Norwegian special operators couldn't specialize as narrowly as their American counterparts. Every FSK and MJK operator had to be proficient across the full spectrum of special operations missions. This versatility made small Norwegian teams remarkably capable. They could conduct direct action, special reconnaissance, foreign internal defense, counter-terrorism, and personnel recovery without needing to call in specialists for each mission type. The small size of Norwegian special operations also fostered a tight-knit culture. In a community of less than 200 operators, everyone knows everyone. Information flows quickly. Lessons learned in one team spread rapidly to others. There's nowhere to hide from accountability, and excellence becomes the standard because your reputation among peers matters enormously. This social cohesion, what military theorists call unit cohesion, is a force multiplier. Teams that trust each other completely can attempt operations that would be too risky for less cohesive units. In 2008, Norwegian regular forces from the Telemark Battalion, supported by special operations elements, participated in Operation Kares in Badghis province of western Afghanistan. This operation targeted Taliban insurgents who had regrouped after earlier offensives. On May 13th, the first day of the operation, 250 Norwegian soldiers established a position near the village of Khor-i-Kares. As twilight fell, Taliban fighters launched what Norwegian commanders described as a well-coordinated assault from about 1,200 meters distance, using rifles, machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenades. The Norwegian response demonstrated the value of rigorous training and professional discipline. Despite the surprise and the intensity of the Taliban attack, the Telemark Battalion soldiers, many experiencing their first combat, maintained composure. They utilized their CV-9030 armored vehicles and mortars to deliver precision fire on the attacking positions. Within hours, the Taliban assault had been repelled. Over the following days, the Norwegians engaged Taliban forces twice more, each time maintaining fire discipline and tactical control. The operation resulted in between 13 and 15 Taliban fighters neutralized with no civilian casualties and no Norwegian losses. The professionalism displayed by these regular Norwegian forces reflected a military culture where even non-special operations units trained to exacting standards. This culture permeated Norwegian military operations in Afghanistan. Whether regular forces or special operators, Norwegian troops demonstrated a calmness under fire, a methodical approach to combat, and a prioritization of precision that became their signature. For the Taliban, fighting Norwegian forces meant facing an enemy that wouldn't panic, wouldn't make reckless mistakes to exploit, and wouldn't generate the civilian casualties that could be used for propaganda. The Norwegian Special Operations model also emphasized learning and adaptation. After each operation, teams conducted thorough after-action reviews. What worked? What didn't? How could performance improve? Lessons from Afghanistan were documented, analyzed, and incorporated into training. This institutional learning meant that Norwegian operators deployed later in the war benefited from the experiences of those who came before. Mistakes weren't repeated, tactics evolved. The Norwegian Special Operations community became progressively more effective as the war continued. This learning culture extended to the strategic level. Norwegian military and political leaders recognized earlier than some allies that the war in Afghanistan couldn't be won by foreign forces alone. As early as 2007, Norway established contact with the Taliban, seeking to contribute to an intra-Afghan peace process. This controversial diplomatic engagement ran parallel to military operations. Norwegian forces continued training Afghan security forces and conducting counterterrorism operations, while Norwegian diplomats maintained dialogue with the enemy. This dual-track approach, fighting while talking, reflected a sophisticated understanding of modern conflict resolution. The diplomatic efforts ultimately failed to prevent the Taliban's return to power in 2021. But the military contribution left a lasting legacy. CRU 222, trained and mentored by Norwegian operators, became one of the Afghan government's most effective security forces. Even as other Afghan units collapsed in the face of the Taliban advance in the summer of 2021, CRU 222 remained cohesive and combat effective until the very end. The professionalism instilled by Norwegian training endured. For Norwegian Special Operations Forces themselves, Afghanistan provided invaluable experience. An entire generation of operators cut their teeth in combat operations spanning 2 decades. The counterterrorism capabilities developed through working with CRU 222 enhanced Norwegian domestic security. The lessons learned in Afghanistan have been transferred to other operations, including the recent training of Ukrainian defense forces. The Norwegian Special Operations community emerged from Afghanistan as one of the most experienced and capable in the world, having operated continuously in a complex counterinsurgency and counterterrorism environment for 20 years. The question of why the Taliban feared Norwegian Special Operations Forces more than other NATO units has multiple answers, each rooted in how Norwegians approached the war. First, there was the professionalism and precision. Norwegian operators didn't conduct raids that killed civilians and created new insurgents. They gathered intelligence patiently, planned meticulously, and struck with surgical precision. For Taliban commanders, this meant that if Norwegian-advised forces were after you, they probably had solid intelligence and a well-executed plan. Your chances of escape were low, and your chances of turning the encounter into a propaganda victory by exploiting civilian casualties were almost non-existent. Second, there was the persistence. Norwegian Special Operations Forces maintained a presence in Afghanistan for 2 decades, long enough for institutional memory to develop among the Taliban. You couldn't wait them out. They weren't rotating through for short tours before being replaced by unfamiliar units. The Norwegians were a constant, professional, deadly presence. Third, there was the multiplier effect of building Afghan capacity. Norwegian operators weren't just conducting their own missions. They were creating Afghan forces capable of sustained, professional counterterrorism operations. Every CRU 222 operator trained by Norwegians became a permanent asset in the fight against the Taliban, one who understood local languages, culture, and terrain far better than any foreign force. From the Taliban perspective, Norwegian Special Operations Forces weren't just a direct threat themselves. They were making the enemy more capable. Fourth, there was the culture of excellence. Norwegian operators came from a military tradition that emphasized quality over quantity, professionalism over bravado, team cohesion over individual glory. They were selected from an already elite military, put through one of the world's most demanding training programs, and operated in small teams where every member had to be exceptional. The Taliban, who had faced many different coalition forces over 2 decades, could recognize this quality. They knew which units were dangerous and which could be baited into mistakes. Finally, there was the Arctic warrior ethos. Norwegian special operators trained in environments that would incapacitate most humans. They learned to function in extreme cold, darkness, and isolation. This training built mental resilience and physical endurance that transferred directly to the mountains of Afghanistan. A Taliban fighter might be accustomed to the Afghan climate and terrain, might be tough and committed, but he hadn't trained for years in the Arctic. He hadn't learned to maintain focus and effectiveness in conditions that broke most people. When that level of mental and physical toughness met Afghan mountain warfare, the results were formidable. None of this is to diminish the capabilities of other NATO Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan. The American, British, Australian, New Zealand, and other Allied special operators all conducted effective operations and built impressive records. But the Norwegian approach had distinctive characteristics that created a particular reputation. Size was actually an advantage. Norwegian Special Operations Forces were small enough to maintain a consistent culture and high selection standards. They couldn't flood the country with operators, so every deployment had to be high quality and high impact. This constraint bred excellence. It's worth noting that Norwegian Special Operations Forces didn't operate in isolation. They were part of the broader NATO Special Operations Component Command Afghanistan, which coordinated special operations across the theater. Norwegian operators worked alongside American, British, and other Allied forces, sharing intelligence, coordinating operations, and learning from each other. The NATO Special Operations community in Afghanistan became a highly integrated force with different national elements bringing unique strengths. The Norwegians brought their precision, patience, and capacity-building expertise. The Americans brought massive resources and enabling capabilities. The British brought decades of counterinsurgency experience. Together, they created a special operations capability greater than the sum of its parts. But within this Allied framework, the Norwegian contribution stood out. A 2009 assessment by NATO commanders described Norwegian Special Forces as having conducted themselves in an exemplary manner since becoming operational under NATO command in March 2007. They gained huge respect and earned strong praise from senior commanders for their successful operational achievements. This wasn't participation trophy recognition, it was acknowledgement from seasoned special operations commanders who had seen many units operate that the Norwegians were exceptional. The tactical innovations developed by Norwegian operators in Afghanistan have influenced special operations practice more broadly. Their approach to foreign internal defense, deeply embedding with partner forces and building genuine professional relationships rather than maintaining advisor distance, became a model studied by other nations. Their emphasis on patience and precision in counterterrorism operations demonstrated that in a counterinsurgency environment, how you achieve effects matters as much as whether you achieve them. A raid that captures a Taliban commander but kills civilians may ultimately be counterproductive. A more careful operation that takes longer to plan and execute but achieves the same tactical result without civilian casualties is strategically superior. Norwegian operations in Afghanistan also demonstrated the value of small, highly trained, versatile teams. In an era when some militaries emphasize technology and mass, the Norwegian example shows that human factors, selection, training, unit cohesion, and tactical skill remain decisive. A small team of exceptionally well-trained operators can accomplish missions that larger, less cohesive forces cannot. This isn't a new lesson. Special operations forces have always understood this, but Afghanistan provided 2 decades of empirical evidence supporting the model. The integration of intelligence and operations was another Norwegian strength. Norwegian intelligence services provided threat assessments and strategic analysis that enabled special operations forces to operate with high situational awareness. This intelligence operations fusion meant that Norwegian operators weren't conducting blind raids based on fragmentary information. They understood the broader operational environment, could place individual targets in context, and could anticipate enemy responses. For the Taliban, this meant facing an enemy who seemed to know their networks, their plans, their safe houses. The feeling of being comprehensively penetrated and understood is psychologically devastating for clandestine insurgents. As we reflect on why the Taliban came to fear Norwegian Special Operations Forces, it's important to avoid romanticizing warfare. The Taliban were and are a formidable enemy, and Norwegian operators faced significant dangers throughout their deployment. IEDs represented the largest threat of severe injury and casualties for all coalition forces, including Norwegians. The Taliban learned and adapted, developing tactics to counter special operations forces. Warfare is a competitive activity where both sides innovate. Norwegian success came not from the enemy's incompetence, but from superior training, planning, and execution in the face of a capable adversary. It's also worth acknowledging the ultimate outcome. Despite 20 years of NATO engagement, despite the professionalism and sacrifice of Norwegian and other allied forces, despite the training of Afghan security forces to international standards, the Afghan government fell to the Taliban in August 2021. President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. Kabul fell without a major battle. The Afghan National Army largely collapsed. This was a strategic defeat for the international coalition, including Norway. But military effectiveness and strategic outcomes are different things. Norwegian Special Operations Forces accomplished their tactical and operational missions with exceptional skill. They built CRU-222 into an elite force. They prevented dozens of terrorist attacks. They earned the respect of allies and enemies alike. The strategic failure of the Afghan intervention doesn't negate these accomplishments. It does, however, illustrate the limits of military excellence when political, economic, and social factors aren't addressed. The Norwegian government commissioned an official review of the Afghanistan mission, delivered in November 2025. This review, titled Defeat Norway in Afghanistan 2015 to 2021, honestly confronted both successes and failures. It praised the Special Operations Forces for their professionalism and their role in preventing attacks that saved lives. It acknowledged that the experience gained enhanced Norwegian counterterrorism capabilities. But it also raised difficult questions about whether diplomatic efforts were too accommodating of the Taliban, whether the mission's goals were realistic, and what lessons should be learned from the ultimate outcome. This kind of honest assessment reflects the same culture of learning and accountability that characterized Norwegian military operations. The willingness to examine failures as thoroughly as successes, to learn from what went wrong as well as what went right, is part of what makes Norwegian military culture effective. It's not about preserving institutional pride or justifying past decisions. It's about understanding reality so future decisions can be better informed. For the individual operators who served in Afghanistan, the experience was transformative. Many spent multiple tours over the 20-year engagement, watching the war evolve, seeing partners and friends lost, experiencing the physical and psychological demands of sustained combat operations. Research on Norwegian Afghanistan veterans has examined the mind frames and coping mechanisms they developed. The switch-on, switch-off mentality helped many manage the stress. The strong unit cohesion provided social support, but the toll was real, as it was for all coalition veterans of the Afghan War. The legacy of Norwegian special operations in Afghanistan is complex. Tactically and operationally, it's a story of excellence sustained over 2 decades. Norwegian operators earned their reputation through skill, discipline, and professionalism. They built effective Afghan partner forces. They prevented attacks that would have killed thousands of civilians. They operated with a precision that minimized civilian casualties, even while conducting aggressive counter-terrorism operations. They earned the respect of allies and the wariness of enemies. Strategically, it's part of the larger story of the Afghan War, an intervention that ultimately failed to achieve its political objectives despite 2 decades of military effort and enormous expenditure of blood and treasure. This strategic failure doesn't erase the tactical successes, but it does contextualize them. Military excellence isn't sufficient to achieve political outcomes when the underlying political, economic, and social conditions don't support sustainable governance. For military professionals studying special operations, the Norwegian experience in Afghanistan offers valuable lessons. Selection and training standards matter. Unit cohesion and culture matter. Patience and precision in operations matter. Building partner capacity rather than conducting all operations unilaterally matters. Integration of intelligence and operations matters. Honest assessment and institutional learning matter. These aren't revolutionary insights, but Afghanistan provided 2 decades of evidence supporting them. For the broader public, the Norwegian story in Afghanistan is a reminder that military effectiveness has many dimensions. The largest force isn't always the most effective. The most technologically advanced isn't always the most successful. Sometimes smaller forces with rigorous selection, excellent training, strong unit cohesion, and a professional culture can achieve outsized effects. The Norwegian Special Operations community, drawn from a nation of just over 5 million people, earned a place among the world's elite through demonstrated performance over 2 decades of combat operations. If you've stayed with us through this entire documentary, thank you. This has been a deep dive into a remarkable military story that doesn't get the attention it deserves. If you found it valuable, please consider sharing it with others interested in military history and special operations. And once again, that like button and subscribe option are waiting for you. Your engagement helps us continue producing this content. The question we started with, why did the Taliban fear Norwegian Special Operations Forces more than other NATO units, has no single answer. It's the convergence of rigorous selection, exceptional training, tactical patience, operational precision, effective partnering with Afghan forces, sustained presence over 2 decades, and a professional military culture that emphasized excellence and accountability. Each of these factors alone would have made Norwegian operators formidable. Combined, they created a force that earned respect from allies and fear from enemies. The Taliban, who fought NATO forces for 20 years, learned to assess which units were most dangerous. They learned which forces could be baited into mistakes and which maintained discipline under pressure. They learned which forces generated civilian casualties that could be exploited for propaganda and which operated with precision that minimized collateral damage. They learned which forces would come for you once and which would persistently hunt you until you were captured or neutralized. By all these measures, Norwegian Special Operations Forces were among the most dangerous enemies the Taliban faced. This reputation was built operation by operation, year after year, through the patient work of operators who rarely sought publicity and often operated in the shadows. The 46 prevented terrorist attacks that never happened, don't generate headlines the way successful raids do. The meticulous training of Afghan partners doesn't produce dramatic footage. The careful planning that prevents civilian casualties doesn't create viral videos. But this unglamorous professional work, sustained over 2 decades, built a reputation among those who mattered most, the allies who fought alongside Norwegian operators and the enemies who faced them. As the last Norwegian operators departed Afghanistan in June 2021, they left behind a country about to fall back into Taliban control. The disappointment must have been profound for those who had spent years, sometimes decades, working to build Afghan capacity and secure the country. But they also left knowing they had performed their missions with exceptional skill, saved lives, built relationships with Afghan partners that honored both sides and upheld the highest standards of their profession. The story of Norwegian Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan is ultimately about professionalism in its truest sense. It's about selecting the right people, training them to the highest standards, giving them clear missions, supporting them properly, holding them accountable, and learning from experience. It's about patience, precision, and partnership. It's about building capability rather than just conducting operations. It's about quality over quantity, excellence over adequacy. These principles, applied consistently over 20 years in one of the world's most challenging operating environments, created a force that punched far above its weight and earned a reputation that will endure long after the last Norwegian operator left Afghan soil. The Taliban, who now control Afghanistan once again, certainly remember. They remember the professionalism, the precision, the persistence. They remember the 46 attacks that never happened because Norwegian-trained Afghan police prevented them. They remember operations where they thought they were safe, only to find themselves expertly isolated and neutralized. They remember that among all the NATO forces they faced over 20 years, the Norwegians were among the most dangerous, not because they were the most numerous or the most heavily armed, but because they were among the most professional, the most patient, the most precise, and the most effective. That's the answer to our question. That's why the Taliban feared Norwegian Special Operations Forces. Not fear born of random violence or overwhelming firepower, but the rational wariness of an experienced enemy who recognizes a superior professional force when they face one. It's a reputation earned, not claimed, built operation by operation year after year by quiet professionals who let their work speak for them.